Where'd you get transferred to?
When I left Fort Baker,
Yeah.
when I left Fort Baker, I was company commander set it up to where I was going to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got up to Fort Lewis, in Washington, why I was checking in there, standing in line. The guy, I don't know if I've told you this before, the guy right behind me was a big, tall guy.
Mm-hmm.
And they were pulling guys out for extra duty and stuff. This guy pulled me out of the line for extra duty. And then he looked and he seen the Korean War medals on me and my rank, and he put me back in line, pulled the guy behind me.
Hmm.
So I never thought anything about it. And that night in the barracks, this guy came up to me. His name was Stan Geddes.
Mm-hmm.
And told me I was an asshole. And I said, why do you say that? He says, because he'd been pulling my KP duty all day.
Hmm.
And I kind of laughed about it a little bit. I said, rank has his privileges, you know, in the Army. And we got to be friends. He was, he was a neat guy. And I told him he was kind of old to be drafted, you know. He was up in his late 20s. And come to find out, him and his wife were splitting up, and his father-in-law was a senator. So he volunteered him for the draft. And he was a disc jockey. He was Stan, the all-night record man from downtown Chicago. So I asked him where he was going. He said the Far Eastern Network in Japan. He was going to be a disc jockey. So I was supposed to be going to Camp Drake right outside of Tokyo. So I told him, we'll have to get together and party and stuff. So well, the day before we were shipping out, why everybody was going through and getting a copy of their orders, you know. And they had these big envelopes for each guy, and they were marking a J on them for Japan, or a K on them for Korea, or an O on for Okinawa. And Stan was way ahead of me on the line, but I could see him up there. I was looking up when he was getting his orders marked, and they marked a big K on his record packet. And I hollered, Stan. I says, hey, Stan. And he stepped out of line, looked back at me, and I says, where are you going, you know? And he gave me the finger, and everybody in the line started laughing, you know? So I was laughing too. But when I got up there and they pulled my record packet, they marked a big K on mine too. They were sending me back to Korea. I didn't know why, but I found out later that while we were at Fort Baker, our whole company was pulled out to fight the forest fire up in Northern California on the Klamath River. And we spent 9 days up there backfiring. Well, they needed firemen in Korea, so they seen this deal on my record that I'd been in the fire for 9 days backfire. So they said they sent me over there as a fireman. So Stan and I hung out together on the boat, you know, spent time together, and there was, I think, 5 guys that run a kind of a gambling deal, you know, and they were cheating everybody. And Stan and I were watching and talking about it. When we got to Japan, well, we got an overnight pass in Yokohama, and we went out on the pass together and hit all the high spots in Yokohama. But anyways, when we went off the boat, we were some of the last guys off the boat for pass. And these 5 guys had gone ahead of us, way ahead of us. And we got down to the first part of the town there in Yokohama. There was a bar. We figured we'd go in and have a beer. And there were some ambulances there. And we couldn't figure out why. So we went in the bar and asked about what was going on. Well, these 5 guys come in the bar. And there were 4 seats at the bar. And there was 5 of them. So this guy, the 5th guy, picked the Japanese guy up off the stool and dumped him off and jumped on there. And these Japanese guys beat these 5 guys up so bad they all had to be taken to the hospital. So we kind of laughed about that. But when we got to Korea, we went in at Incheon, and we were there for a couple of days waiting for our assignment to, and I was shipped out first, and before any of the guys we buddied up with, and they were sending me north to the 86th EFFD, was the Engineer Firefighting Detachment. Of course, nobody knew what it was, and we talked about it and tried to find out what EFFD was. We didn't know. Nobody knew. So I had to get on a train. I got on a train with a whole company going to the 13th Combat Engineers. So we went all the way from Incheon to Yeongdeungpo to Seoul and north to Uijeonbu. And that's where the train ended, at Uijeonbu. So we were just below the 38th parallel. Anyways, I got off the train and was sitting there in my duffel bag, and all these guys left. They had trucks there to pick them up to take them to 13 Combat Engineers. And then this Jeep come down the road, and the fire chief come down to pick me up, and he had me load my stuff up. Got in the Jeep and we started down the road, and he said, "Where'd you get your firefighter training at?" And I told him I didn't have any firefighter training. The only thing I'd been in a fire was 9 days in that forest fire, backfiring. And he said, you didn't have firefighter training? I told him no. So he took me to we were detached from the 46th Engineers, so he took me to the captain that was in charge of all of this, the 46th Engineers, our company commander. And he had me take my duffel bags and everything. We went in to see the captain, and he told the captain, he says, "Here's your man." And he says, the captain says, "He's not my man, he's your man." He says, well, he hadn't had any firefighting training, so I don't want him. And the captain told him, take me and get the hell out of there, and he didn't want to see either one of us again. So we went to the fire station, and we got out of the vehicle, and I grabbed my bags and stuff, and he took me in and showed me a cot. Says, that's your bunk right there.
Mm-hmm.
So I put my stuff on the bunk, and we were sitting around there, and we just been there a minute, and the fire alarm went off. They had a fire, so all the guys were running around grabbing their helmets and their fire coats and stuff. And so I just run around behind them, and I went out on the truck, and the fire truck, the engine was going out, getting ready to go out, and water tanker was going to follow him. So I jumped on the duck board on the back of the fire truck, and we went out. There was a diesel fire. The enemy had cut the diesel line and took all the diesel they wanted, and then they just lit it on fire when they left. And we got there, and it was still pumping diesel, and it was a hell of a fire. And they radioed up ahead and got them to shut the diesel off. Anyways, when we pulled up and stopped the truck, why, somebody hollered, pull the hose loose, pull the hose loose. So I noticed the hose up there. Me and this other guy was there on the duckboard. And he reached up and grabbed the deal, and I reached up and grabbed one. The truck lurched forward, and we pulled all the hoses off. I started running. They started running the hoses out to the diesel fire, so I just started grabbing the hose and pulling it out there with them, and doing what I could. And somebody hollered, "Get the foam! Get the foam!" So they had the foam nozzle. So I run back up to the truck, and I found 2 5-gallon cans painted yellow with foam printed on it. So I grabbed these and I run them out there to the guy on the nozzle, and then he got the foam started and shooting out on the fire, and I just backed him up with the hoses and stuff, So when the fire was out, why, we loaded all the hose back on the truck and everything. And when we got back to the station, they had a concrete pad there that they pulled the truck up on. We pulled the hoses off and had to wash the truck down and set these hoses aside and put all fresh hoses on to be ready for the next fire. And I was just going along with the guys doing what they were doing, And when after the truck was loaded up and they pulled the truck out, then the fire engine out, then we had to wash all these the hoses we used on the fire. So we had these deals to wash them with and everything. We were doing that. And they wouldn't let anybody go back in the firehouse till everything was packed and ready for the next fire. So the chief went in the firehouse, and he come back out with 2 cups of coffee. And he walked up to me and he gave me a cup of coffee, and he said, "You'll do." So I was a fireman.
All right.
So it was really interesting. I just started out as a flunky, hopping on the back of the truck and going to fire and doing stuff. And there was another corporal there besides me. It was Pete Axford from Southern California. And one day the fire chief said, "We're going to have 2 crews now." He says, "Pete Axford will be the first crew chief on the number 1 crew. And he said, Clifford will be the other chief on the other crew." So I waited till the meeting was over with, and he went off in the office where the phone was, where we received the call. And I went in after him. I said, "How in the hell is this going to work?" I'm not a trained fireman, but you made me a crew chief. He looked at me and he said, well, you're a corporal. You outrank all of them but Pete. So he says, you're going to be the other crew chief. So, and the guys were happy about that. Nobody wanted to take responsibility, and stuff. So I drove the truck out on the first fire. I don't remember what it was. We put it out, come back. And the fire chief says to me, you have a driver's license? I said, well, yeah. So I got my California license out, and he said, no, military driver's license. I said, no. So he told me, go around behind the station there and get the 1,000-gallon tanker and pull it around. We're gonna go get you a driver's license. So I went back there, got in there, and I knew there was no keys. It was all on magneto, so turned the magneto on, reached down, hit the floor starter and started it up. Then I went around to shift gears, and there were no gear shifts, no clutch. It had automatic transmission. I'd never seen an automatic transmission before. Didn't know they made them. And I looked at the shift, and it said P for park, neutral for neutral, D1, D2, DT, and then R for reverse. So I tried pulling the lever, to shift gears, and couldn't do it. So then I pushed down on it. You had to push down on it to shift it. So I pulled it forward a little bit, and then I went back and pulled the reverse and backed it up and went around, picked up the chief. We went down to the motor pool, what it was. We pulled up, and there's a tin shack right there where you go in, and the motor sergeant was up there. So we pulled up, and the fire chief, he started BSing with him, so I listened to him for a while, and I says, well, when do I get to take the test? So the guy got out of the shed and come around there and had the fire chief get out, and me hop on the truck, and him hop on the truck with me. He says, back this thing out of here. So I put it in reverse and backed out, and he told me where to go, and we drove around for about 20 minutes. Come back and pulled back up in there, and the fire chief was setting up in his office there in the shack, and they started BSing, talking again. And I finally said, well, when do I get to take the test? And the motor pool sergeant looked at me, and he said, you just passed the test. So he had this guy take me into another tin shack and type me up a driver's license. So that was my start in the fire station. But we had all kinds of fires.
How long after you got there did they make you a crew chief?
I was only there for about a week.
Okay.
A week or 2 weeks, going out on all the fires. And some days would go by and we wouldn't have a fire.
Mm-hmm.
And we did training exercises. And he asked me, the guys were doing training runs. They would start the truck up, and he'd tell them to go. They go out and run out there, and they had a ready line. They'd run out, and the guy was a driver, an engineer. He'd put it in neutral and set it up, and he'd go out, and he'd have to pull a vacuum on the pump till it got to be a 4-pound vacuum, and then he'd open the valves to pump the water out to the hose. And this was all timed. So we're watching, and he says, you drive that truck? I says, oh yeah. I says I could drive any of the trucks I think they have. So he had me go out and start making the run as the engineer driving the truck. So I went out there, and Pete Axford got in the truck with me. And I says, showed me how the gear shift worked and everything, you know. And I started making the runs, and then shortly after that, he made me the crew chief.
Mm.
And we went out on all kinds of fires. One night, we got a call from 8th Ordnance. I used to go out with the chief. We did fire inspections of these different units where they're. And we got a call one night for 8th Ordnance, and I pulled fire inspections. I said, I know where it is, but I didn't know it was I didn't think about it was an ammunition dump. So we went ahead and went on out, and the water tanker was following us, and I was driving the engine. Pulled up to the gate in the front of 8th Ordnance, and the MPs were there, and they had the gate open. They were just giving us a sign. We could look way down there and see it was a generator was on fire. So I drove on down there and pulled right up so we could use the ready line and get the foam and all that. And nobody was there. Normally when you got a fire, everybody's out there looking, you know. And this place was totally deserted, you know. Never thought anything about it being an ammunition dump. So put the fire out, and still was nobody there. So we loaded all up and took off back out the gate. We got out the gate, there was a bird colonel standing outside the gate, flagged us down. He wanted to know our names and serial numbers and this stuff, so he was asked us, and he was writing it all down. So I said, I don't know what's going on. He said, well, that's one of the bravest acts I've ever seen. You guys pulled right into an ammunition dump and put out a fire and never flinched or nothing. You know. So we go back to the station, go through the cleaning of the truck and everything, and going to sack out. Next morning we get a call from the company headquarters, 46th Engineers. The company clerk called and wanted to talk to me. So I got on the phone with him, and he says, when they got there that morning, there was a bird colonel there, and he wanted to talk to the company commander. He went with the company commander. He had all the paperwork filled out for bravery medals for us. And the company commander, he said the company commander tore the orders up and threw them in a wastebasket. He says, the company commander says, if they gave us a bravery medal for what we did that night, he'd have to give us one every day. So twice the company commander I was put in for bravery medals, and they tore them up and threw them in a wastebasket. Personnel tried to promote me to staff sergeant. I don't know how many times, and he tore the orders up and threw them in a wastebasket. Of course, the fire chief was on his 3rd trip to Korea. I was on my 2nd trip to Korea. And the company commander, he was on his 1st trip, but he really resented us. He had to be there and couldn't be with his wife and kids and stuff, you know. So he took it out on us. He blamed us, you know.
Well, nobody could.
So, yeah. So it just went on. And finally, we got to the point that come time for the fire chief to rotate out. Well, the company commander rotated out first. He was gone. They got a new company commander. And then the chief rotated out. And then the old company commander, he put me on extra duty every chance he got. So I would have to go down to the officers' mess and do head count on the officers' mess. The officers had to pay to eat, you know, because they got big pay and stuff. Anyways, we didn't. And they had a different mess hall for the officers than it did for us. We ate off tin trays, and the officers all ate off plates and stuff. Yeah. Anyway, I was down there on extra duty doing head count. When they come in, I had a pamphlet there, and the officer had to sign and everything before you could go in and eat. And then whenever the commanding general come in, why I was the guy that had to stand up and holler attention, and everybody would stand up and he say at ease. Anyways, after the new company commander got been there for a while, why he come in and I had him sign the paperwork and stuff, and he went and got his plate and went to sit down to eat, and he looked back at me and he realized who I was. So he come back to me and he said, "What the hell are you doing here?" I said, "Well, the old company commander put me on extra duty every week, you know, once a week." And he says, at that time I was assistant fire chief. Peter rotated out, and then I was assistant fire chief. So he says, "You have no business down here on extra duty." So he went and got the head cook, grabbed him and pulled him out there and made him take the job. Says he didn't ever want to see me back there again. So the next week I was on extra duty again. So I went down there. I didn't complain to anything. I just went down there and did it. And he come in again and signed the paperwork and started to walk away. And he looked back at me and he went and he got the head cook and he grabbed him by the front of his shirt and he drug him out there, said to me, "Go back to the fire station. You have no damn business here doing head count." And he told that head cook, he better never see me in here again, or he'd have his ass. So, anyways, the new company commander started finding out this thing from the company clerk that the previous company commander had pulled with the bravery medals and all this stuff. So I didn't know anything about it. They didn't tell me anyways. Come time for me to rotate out, and the company commander come down and wanted to talk, so we took a seat. The fire chief had rotated out, so I had to take charge as the fire chief till we got a new fire chief in. And we talked, and he says he found out what he'd been doing to us, and he tried everything he could to get us promoted and everything else. And he says he just got the paperwork for me to be shipped out back home, you know. So he said he had to apologize to him. And he asked me if I was going to re-up when I got back, and I told him no, I'm going to get the hell out of the Army, you know. And he said guys like him cost the Army a lot of good people. But it was, we got the new fire chief come in. I've been the acting fire chief for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks before he come in. And he come in, and I went down and drove the Jeep down, picked him up at the railhead, and took him back to the fire station. Anyways, I told him, "Come on in." We took his stuff in, and I says, we'll set the table and get all the firemen here, and I'll introduce you to them. and we'll have coffee, And I introduced him to all the guys, and I asked him where he came from. He'd been a fire chief in Germany for 6 years. I said, well, how many fires a day did you have? Or a week, or whatever, And he looked at me kind of funny, and he said, we only had one fire. One fire in 6 years? I said, well, what kind of fire was it? He says it was a trash fire in an alley. And I just looked around at the guys, and they all looked at me, and the alarm went off. We had a fire to go to. And this guy sat there, and his eyes glazed over, and he couldn't move. So we just hauled ass and went out, put the fire out, come back. It was a week before he finally got to where he could move. And we had a fire almost every day. And it was funny. And after a week, when the fire alarm went off, well, he run around and run out and jumped in the fire chief's Jeep and took off down the road. And we got together and went to the fire, and we don't know where he went. So we put the fire out and come back, and we're cleaning everything up. And here he come down the road, coming back. And he come up to us and he said, well, I finally was able to move anyways. But he was really sharp. He was really smart. He had all the training you could imagine, And they did everything they could to get me promoted to staff sergeant before they shipped me out. I shipped out, I come home, and they sent me to the 84th Engineers at Fort Ord, and they were a processing company, a company, and they were going to process me into Deseret, Nevada, but I had to have a top secret clearance, and I couldn't get a top secret clearance because my stepfather was a naturalized citizen from Italy, and he still had relatives alive in Italy, so they couldn't give me a top secret clearance. So they had me stay there and had me driving a dump truck on the construction platoon. And we were going out. I'd drive the guys out in the morning. We were going over to Presidio in Monterey, and they had these old buildings there. They were knocking them all down, and we were busting up the concrete. And then they'd load the concrete up in the truck, and I'd go to the dump and dump the concrete and come back and take them back and forth to work every day. And finally, I got a call. A guy come to the barracks, told me one day to it was evening after dinner, get back up to the orderly room right now. They said that I had a phone call. So I double timed from the barracks to the orderly room, got in there, and the first sergeant was there, and the company commander had gone. He lived off the base, so he went home. He'd gone home, and he gave me the phone number. The master sergeant did. He gave me the phone number to call, and I called the phone. He told me to go ahead and call, so I called. It was my sister Irene, and she said she'd been to the Red Cross and my father was going to have a leg amputated, and they didn't think he'd live through the operation. So she called the Red Cross to get me emergency leave so I could go home to be there. My dad and all my sisters wanted me to be there for the operation, you know, and they wouldn't do it. There was no pay going to the Red Cross for me doing this or anything, so they just dismissed it. So I told the first sergeant about what had happened, you know, and I told him, I says, when you have roll call in the morning, I'll be AWOL. I won't be here because I'm going home to be with my dad. Anyways, he says, hold on a minute, he says. I'm going to call the company commander at home. So he called him at home and told him what had happened with the Red Cross and everything. So the company commander told me not to leave, not to become AWOL, and he would be there at 5 o'clock in the morning, and he'd have all the paperwork made out for emergency leave for me. So I loaded my stuff in the back of my Chevy, and when he gave me the paperwork, I thanked him and took off home. I got home, my dad was in the surgery. So they showed me where they were going to bring him into bed, and give me a chair, and I sat there and waited, and they brought my dad in and put him in the bed. When he woke up, the way he looked over at me, got a big smile on his face, you know. He wasn't expected to live through the operation, but he made it fine.
Yeah.
So after 2 days of being there with him, I had a 10 days emergency leave. And I told my sisters I was going to go back, and my dad. So I went back, and the company commander wanted to know what the hell I was doing there. He says, you got 10 days emergency leave. We expected you to stay for 10 days, you know. And I told him, well, you did me a big favor. So I says, I didn't want to take advantage of you. I'd come back as quick as I could, be driving my dump truck again. And a week later, they called me out of morning formation, and they told me I was going to go before a promotion board. They wanted to promote me to staff sergeant. Evidently, the company commander had looked up my record and seen, you know, I'd been to Korea twice and everything. So, anyways, I went down there. They took me down there, the master sergeant and the company commander, and there were 3 officers there. They were like colonels or whatever. And I watched these other guys go up there when they called their name. They had to go up and salute and report and all that shit. And then they talked to them and everything, and then they had them leave. And when they called my name, I got up and I walked up there and saluted them and reported to them who I was. And the guy says to me, he says, why do you think you should be promoted to staff sergeant? And I thought about it for a second, and I says, I don't really care about being promoted to staff sergeant. I says, all I want to do is finish my time and go out the gate and never look back. And these guys were stunned. They never heard anything like that from anybody. I says, I don't know why they tried to promote me to staff sergeant then, you know. The company commander told me later I should have taken it. He says, he looked at my record and he says I should have been promoted a long time ago to staff sergeant. So anyways, they didn't promote me. And I told them I was a fireman, and here they had me working as the dump truck driver. and I should be in the fire department. I got a lot of experience as a fireman. And they told me, the promotion board, that all the firemen at Fort Ord were all civilians. I said, that's not my fault. So they transferred me to Hunter Liggett Military Reservation, and we had 5 military guys there and 5 civilians. And I got the other guys were all higher ranking, like sergeant first classes and master sergeants and all this other stuff. And me and this one guy, Pat Patterson, he just got out of the stockade. He'd been busted. So he was a private, I was a corporal. So we got all the flunky stuff. So about once a week we had coming into the base, it had down the road, this big long road coming into the base, and it had oleanders as the divider. So the base commander would set us up to water these oleanders every week. So Pat Patterson and I had to do it. So we set up water wands and fog nozzles and stuff on them, and we'd go out and go by. He'd get on one side and I'd get on the other side. Then we'd hose each other down if we went by, playing a game. And base commander, he used to fly a light airplane, checking for fires and stuff. And he caught us doing this from the airplane. And he gave us a hell of a chew out for it. And whenever the state fire department from the city of Holon, whenever they needed water trucks, and the state was doing road work, whenever they needed water trucks, Pat and I would have to take out the water trucks and take water and do different things and all kinds of. We were the flunkies. Anyways, they had a big state fire going out right out of Holon, and they called for the water trucks, and the chief sent Pat Patterson and myself out. So he said the headquarters was at the school gymnasium in Holon. So we were to report there. So we drove over there, each driving a 1,000-gallon tanker. And we got there, and the chief, he sent Pat Patterson one way, and he looked at me and he says, there's a road that goes out north of here and goes up, and there's a tractor trailer water tanker up there, and we couldn't get it on a ridge, and they'd cut a path, a road going up to this ridge. He says, we'd like you to try and get that water tanker up on that ridge, and because the fire will be up on that ridge at midnight. And he says all these water trucks, these fire trucks will be, up there, and they'll need water. So I drove on up there, and I found that tractor trailer rig, like they said, and I found a road that they cut up there. But it was cut up there with a Caterpillar. And I got the spots I had to back up and run at it again to get around, And what really helped me was the weight of that 1,000 gallons of water, get traction to get up. And I got up on top of the ridge, and I looked down, and you could see miles down there, and see the fire. And I see the trucks look like they're about that tall down there, And so I figured, well, I just had sea rations there. I'd have something to eat and wait, And I kept waiting, and the fire kept coming up the ridge, And The trucks didn't show up, but the fire did. And I knew damn well I couldn't get that tanker off that ridge without an accident with 1,000 gallons of water in it. So I took my water wand pipe and hooked it up so I could pump water like we were watering and I put a fog nozzle on there and I run it out the window on the side, like we did in the road. And when the fire started getting up there, I started pumping the water and I through a fog nozzle. It'll take a long time to put 1,000 gallons of water through a fog nozzle. And I started driving down the ridge. And I could turn around on both ends. And I just spray, you know, and then I'd turn the nozzle out the other way so I could spray. And I kept doing that and doing that and doing that and doing that all night long. And when I run out of water, the fire was out. So I'm sitting up on the ridge waiting for daylight so I could get my way back down the ridge, you know. Here come the fire trucks. There was 5 of them. They pulled up there and the head guy got out and looked at me and he says, "Who put the fire out?" So I told him what happened. I says, "They told me to be up here. You guys would be up here at midnight needing water and all that." I said, "You guys didn't show up." So I hooked up my water wand and I just drove the ridge. I says, when I run out of water, the fire was out. So he turned around and he hollered to all these guys, and there was 5 trucks. "This guy put the fire out up here on this ridge all by himself last night," you know. So they all whistled and clapped and all that. So 2 of the guys want to know if they could ride back with me, you know. I said, "Sure. This be a hell of a go going down that ridge in a water truck." And all the fire trucks went on ahead of us. They're going back to the schoolyard where the commander was. So we start off the ridge, and it was so steep you couldn't keep your butt on the seat. It was just, you know, sliding and putting on the brakes and sliding and sliding. We got down off the ridge and got on the road, and all the fire trucks were out of sight. So we just headed back down there and poking along. We got back to the schoolhouse, you know, the gymnasium where the fire chief was. I seen Pat Patterson's water truck sitting there, so I pulled up next to him. We got out. And when I walked into the gymnasium, somebody hollered, "There's the guy that held that ridge all by himself last night." Yeah. So they all started clapping and whistling and all that other stuff, you know. And I went up and reported to the commander, and he wanted to know what happened. I said, "Nothing happened." I says, Pat Patterson and I got to get back to the mission. It was just down the road from where we were, our company headquarters, and fill up the water trucks and report back to our commander." So he said, "Go on." So we did. And we got back to the fire station and went in and got a bite to eat, and we both hit the sack. We woke up in the afternoon, you know. And the chief come in later and he says, they need the 2 water trucks back on the state fire again. So he says, Patterson and me, Clifford, he says, "I want you guys to take the water trucks back up there like you did last night." And I told him, I said, "Why don't you send some of these other firemen? These civilian firemen don't have that much fire experience. It'd be a good experience with them, being with the truck." He says, "Well," he says, "they asked for you by name." So I told him, "Yeah, but these guys need the experience." So he sent a couple of civilians out on them. So nothing was said, and a week later, Pat Patterson and I are out in the garage working on the trucks, and guy come running out of the office, a civilian and fireman. And he come up and he said, the chief wanted to see me in the fire station right now. And I thought, oh shit, I'm in trouble for something, you know. So I headed down there and I walked in, and he's standing there and he's got these papers in his hand. And he said, what happened? What did you do out on that fire that night when you were out for the state? I told him, well, they sent Pat Patterson one way and they sent me another way to get up on this bridge, you know, with a water tanker, because their trucks would be there at midnight, you know. And I told him really nothing, you know. And he's got this paperwork in his hand. He said, bullshit, what did you do that night out there on the fire? I said, well, I got up on the ridge and I says, the fire kept coming and the trucks never came. So I just hooked up my water wand and started running the ridge. And I says, with the fog nozzle, I says, 1,000 gallons of water through a fog nozzle is a hell of a lot of water, you know. And I said, when I got done, the fire was out. And he had these 3 paperworks in his hand. He says, these are for you. One was a letter from the governor's office, Goodwin J. Knight, commanding us on what we did that night. And then one was from the commanding general at Fort Ord. And then the other one was for the base commander at Hunter Liggett. And he said, these are for you. He says, he was a civilian. He'd been there for a good number of years as a fire chief. He says, we've been out all kinds of fires with the state and everywhere. He says, we have never got letters like this, ever. So it was kind of neat.
That is neat.
I can show you the letters if you want.
All right. Well,
You
if
wanna
we,
see
if
the
we can find
letters?
them, sure.